The man who mows your neighbor's lawn might be worth more than your dentist. The quiet coworker who brings the same turkey sandwich every single day, who's never once mentioned a vacation, who drives a car with 190,000 miles on it, he could be sitting on a 7-figure portfolio right now, and none of you would ever know it. Here's the uncomfortable truth about wealth. It rarely looks the way we've been trained to expect. The loudest people in the room are almost never the richest. The flashiest spender is usually the one drowning in debt. And the millionaire next door, he's not next door. He's invisible, hiding in plain sight, disguised as ordinary. Today, we're breaking that disguise. We're going to walk through 10 distinct psychological types, real patterns of thinking and behavior that quietly, consistently, almost boringly produce millionaires. Not lottery winners, not overnight tech founders. Regular people whose minds are simply wired a little differently than everyone else's. By the end of this video, you might just realize you already know one of these people. Or, more unsettling, you might realize you are one. Let's begin. Introduction. Wealth psychologists have spent decades studying self-made millionaires, and one finding shows up again and again. Financial success has almost nothing to do with income, intelligence, or luck. It has everything to do with behavior patterns, small, repeated decisions that compound silently over 20 or 30 years. Most people assume millionaires are extroverted risk-takers who made it big. In reality, the data tells a completely different story. Surveys of self-made millionaires consistently find that the majority never earned 6 figures at their peak salary. Many drove used cars, many lived in the same modest house for decades. What set them apart wasn't their bank statement, it was the operating system running quietly behind their eyes. So let's meet the 10 types. Some of these people you'll recognize instantly, others will surprise you. Stick around because type number 7 is the one almost nobody expects, and type number 10 might be sitting across the dinner table from you tonight. Type 1. The gray man. Picture the most forgettable person at any party. Beige jacket, doesn't talk about his job, orders water, you'd walk past him in a parking lot and never remember his face. Psychologists call this pattern strategic invisibility. The gray man understands something most people never grasp: visibility costs money. Every time you signal status, a new watch, a louder car, a designer logo, you're paying a tax on other people's opinions of you. The gray man refuses to pay that tax. He's not cheap out of anxiety, he's selective out of strategy. His fridge is stocked with generic brands, but his brokerage account has been quietly compounding for 22 years. He'll spend 3 hours comparing insurance policies to save $400 a year, then turn around and invest that same $400 without a second thought, because in his mind, one is waste and the other is growth. Take someone like Gary, a maintenance supervisor at a mid-sized apartment complex in Ohio. Gary makes $68,000 a year. Nobody at his job would guess he's worth $1.4 million, built almost entirely through decades of unglamorous index fund contributions and a refusal to ever upgrade his lifestyle just because his paycheck grew. The gray man succeeds because he's solved the psychological trap that ruins most earners, the belief that earning more means you're supposed to spend more. He never got the memo, and that's exactly why he wins. But every archetype has its shadow side, and the gray man's is loneliness. Because he never signals success, he sometimes goes his entire life without anyone truly seeing what he's built. Which brings us to a very different kind of thinker. Type 2, the obsessive hobbyist. This is the person who didn't set out to build wealth at all. They set out to build something they loved, and money followed as a side effect nobody saw coming. The obsessive hobbyist has a brain wired for what psychologists call flow state persistence. They can focus on one narrow interest: vintage furniture restoration, competitive fishing gear, custom keyboard mechanics, whatever it is, for hours without getting bored, long after everyone else would have quit. Think of someone like Priya, a school teacher in Manchester who started restoring old sewing machines as a stress relief hobby during her lunch breaks. She wasn't thinking about money. She just loved the process, finding broken machines, researching parts, bringing them back to life. 5 years in, collectors were messaging her from 3 different continents. What began as pure obsession quietly turned into a 6-figure side business and eventually into real wealth. Here's the psychological trick. Because the obsessive hobbyist isn't driven by money, they don't burn out the way pure profit seekers do. Motivation researchers call this intrinsic durability. When your reward system runs on curiosity instead of dollar signs, you can outlast almost anyone chasing a paycheck. money chasers quit when the market dips. Hobbyists keep going because they'd be doing it anyway. The failure mode here is obvious, though most obsessive hobbies never turn into income at all. The ones who succeed are the rare few who eventually notice the demand forming around them and are willing, just slightly, to let the hobby become a business without losing what made it enjoyable in the first place. Speaking of noticing things other people miss, our next type has built an entire fortune on exactly that skill. Type 3, the pattern hunter. Some people are wired to notice inefficiencies the way a bloodhound notices scent. Where you see a boring spreadsheet, they see a gap. Where you see a broken system, they see an opportunity hiding in the cracks. The pattern hunter isn't necessarily brilliant in a traditional academic sense. Many never finished college. What they have instead is an obsessive attention to friction, the small, annoying inefficiencies everyone else has simply learned to tolerate. Consider Marcus, a former warehouse worker in Brisbane who noticed that his employer was paying a fortune for pallet wrapping film that was constantly running short mid-shift, forcing workers to stop the line. Nobody else questioned it, it was just how things were. Marcus spent his weekends researching suppliers, found a manufacturer selling the exact same film at 40% less, and pitched it to his manager. 6 months later, he'd started his own small supply business selling directly to warehouses across the region. Within 8 years, he'd built a company worth well over $2 million from noticing something that had been sitting in plain sight the entire time. Cognitive scientists describe this as friction sensitivity, a heightened irritation with inefficiency that most people simply tune out as background noise. The pattern hunter can't tune it out, it nags at them until they fix it. The risk for this type is obsession without discipline, chasing every inefficiency they spot instead of committing to the one that actually matters. The successful ones learn to filter. Not every annoyance is an opportunity, but every so often one absolutely is. Now let's talk about someone whose entire wealth strategy is built on a much quieter emotion, patience bordering on stubbornness. Type 4. The tortoise. If the pattern hunter is fast and clever, the tortoise is slow and almost boringly consistent, and that's precisely the point. The tortoise doesn't chase trends. They don't panic sell when markets crash, and they don't get swept up when everyone around them is bragging about some hot new investment. Their psychological superpower is what behavioral economists call temporal discounting resistance, the rare ability to resist the pull of instant gratification in favor of a reward decades away. Think of Linda, a retired postal worker in Alberta, who put a fixed percentage of every single paycheck into the same boring retirement fund for 34 years without ever checking the balance more than twice a year. She lived through 3 market crashes. She never once touched the account in a panic. By the time she retired, that boring fund had grown into $2.3 million, not because she picked winning stocks, but because she simply never got in her own way. This is the type most people underestimate because there's no exciting story to tell. No dramatic pivot, no lucky break, just relentless, almost stubborn consistency. And that stubbornness is exactly why the tortoise almost never fails. The biggest threat to their wealth isn't the market, it's their own boredom. The moment a tortoise starts getting clever and abandoning the boring plan for something exciting, that's usually when the trouble starts. But not everyone builds wealth through patience. Some build it through relationships, and our next type has turned social skill into an actual asset class. Type 5, the quiet connector. You won't find the quiet connector posting motivational quotes online or handing out business cards at networking events. Instead, you'll find them remembering your kid's name, checking in on you after a rough week, and somehow always knowing exactly the right person to introduce you to. Psychologists call this social capital accumulation, and it works almost like compound interest, except the currency is trust instead of money. The quiet connector doesn't network to extract value. They build relationships because they genuinely enjoy people, and then, almost as an afterthought, those relationships open doors that money alone could never buy. Take someone like David, an insurance adjuster in Leeds who spent 15 years quietly helping friends, neighbors, and coworkers with small favors, reviewing a lease, recommending a good contractor, connecting someone to a job opening he'd heard about. He never asked for anything in return. Years later, when he decided to start a small property consultancy, half his client base came from people he'd helped for free over a decade earlier. His business hit 7 figures in under 5 years, built almost entirely on relationships he never once tried to monetize. The danger for this type is being taken advantage of, because genuine kindness can be exploited by people who only take and never give back. The successful quiet connectors learn, eventually, to be generous without being a doormat. Now, from relationships, let's shift to a type driven by something almost the opposite: fear. Type 6. The anxious planner. This type doesn't build wealth because they're optimistic about the future. They build it because they're terrified of it, and that fear, properly channeled, becomes an incredibly powerful engine. The anxious planner lies awake at night running worst-case scenarios. What if I lose my job? What if I get sick? What if the economy collapses? Where most people feel that anxiety and freeze, the anxious planner feels it and acts, building emergency funds, buying insurance, over-preparing for disasters that usually never come. Consider Sarah, a nurse in Sydney who, after watching her parents lose their savings during an economic downturn in the 90s, became almost obsessive about financial preparation. She built a 12-month emergency fund when most advisors recommend 3 to 6. She overinsured, she oversaved. Friends used to gently tease her for being paranoid. Then the pandemic hit, half her department got laid off, and Sarah didn't just survive. She used her cushion to buy discounted real estate while everyone else was selling in a panic. That single decision alone added hundreds of thousands to her net worth within a few years. Psychologically, this is defensive pessimism doing exactly what it evolved to do, using anxiety as fuel for preparation rather than paralysis. The failure mode, of course, is when the anxiety tips into hoarding so extreme that the person never actually enjoys what they've built. The successful anxious planners eventually learn to let the fear build the foundation, then step back and actually live on it. Our next type flips this completely, building wealth not from fear, but from an almost childlike refusal to follow the rules. Type 7, the rule breaker. This is the type almost nobody expects, because on the surface they look like the least responsible person in any room. The rule breaker questions everything. Why do we retire at 65? Why does everyone buy a house the same way? Why is this industry structured like this? Where most people accept the default path because it's the default, the rule breaker treats every convention as a hypothesis to be tested. Take James, a former real estate agent in Toronto who got frustrated with the standard commission model everyone in his industry followed. Instead of accepting it, he built his own flat-fee brokerage model that nobody else in his city was offering. Colleagues told him it would never work. Clients expect the traditional system, they said. Within 4 years, his broken rule business was outperforming traditional agencies threefold, because he'd found a gap that existed purely because everyone else was too comfortable to question it. The psychological trait here is called authority skepticism, a healthy, productive distrust of that's just how it's done. It's the same trait that makes rule breakers difficult employees but exceptional entrepreneurs. The risk, obviously, is that breaking rules for the sake of breaking them without discipline just leads to chaos and failure. The ones who succeed learn to break only the rules that deserve breaking and follow the ones that actually matter, like basic financial discipline. Now let's meet someone whose wealth-building weapon isn't cleverness at all, it's raw, simple work ethic taken to an extreme most people can't sustain. Type 8, the grinder. The grinder doesn't have a genius insight. They don't spot brilliant patterns or break industry norms. What they have is an almost unnatural tolerance for sustained, unglamorous effort year after year, long after everyone else has quit. Take Angela, a hairdresser in Cardiff who worked 6 days a week for over a decade, saved aggressively, and eventually opened her own salon. Then a second, then a third. Nothing about her story is flashy. There's no lucky break, no clever loophole. Just an almost machine-like consistency of showing up, working hard, and reinvesting every spare pound back into growth. Researchers studying grit have found that raw persistence, not talent, not intelligence, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success across almost every field. The grinder embodies this almost perfectly. They're not smarter than everyone else. They simply refuse to stop. The failure mode for this type is burnout, or worse, mistaking motion for progress, grinding endlessly at something that was never going to work, simply because quitting feels like weakness. The successful grinders eventually learn to pair their relentless work ethic with just enough strategic thinking to make sure the effort is actually pointed somewhere worthwhile. Now let's talk about a type that seems to contradict everything we've covered so far, someone who spends money freely and still ends up wealthy. Type 9, the calculated spender. This might be the most misunderstood type on this list, because from the outside they look like the opposite of frugal. The calculated spender takes nice vacations, they own a decent car, they eat out regularly, but look closer and you'll notice something interesting: every dollar they spend is intentional. They're not cutting costs everywhere, they're cutting costs selectively, ruthlessly trimming the expenses that don't bring them joy so they can spend generously on the few things that genuinely do, while investing aggressively with everything left over. Consider Tom, a software support technician in Denver who drives a 10-year-old car and lives in a modest one-bedroom apartment, but takes 2 genuinely wonderful international trips every year because travel is the one thing that lights him up. Everything else in his life is stripped down to bare essentials, not out of deprivation but out of deliberate prioritization. That intentionality freed up enough cash flow for him to max out his retirement contributions every single year for 15 years straight, quietly building a portfolio worth over $900,000 by his early 40s. Behavioral economists call this values-based spending, and it solves the exact problem that trips up so many disciplined savers. Total deprivation eventually leads to burnout and rebellion, usually in the form of one giant impulsive purchase that undoes years of progress. The calculated spender never rebels because they never felt deprived in the first place. And finally, we come to the 10th type, arguably the most surprising because their wealth doesn't come from any single decision at all. It comes from something almost invisible: identity. Type 10, the identity shifter. This is the rarest and most psychologically fascinating type on the list because their transformation doesn't start with a strategy. It starts with a single, quiet decision to see themselves differently. Most people who struggle financially don't lack information. Plenty of broke people know in theory that they should save more and spend less. What they lack is identity alignment. Deep down, they still see themselves as someone who's bad with money, and no amount of budgeting advice sticks to a self-image that contradicts it. The identity shifter is someone who, often after a single triggering moment, a divorce, a health scare, hitting rock bottom financially, makes a deliberate decision to become a fundamentally different person with money. Not just changing their habits, but changing their self-concept. Take Robert, a delivery driver in Manchester who, at 38, had almost nothing saved and was drowning in credit card debt after a difficult divorce. Instead of just trying to budget better, Robert made a deeper shift. He started describing himself out loud to himself and others as someone who builds wealth. He read everything he could find. He surrounded himself with people who talked about investing instead of instant gratification. Within a decade, that shift in self-image translated into genuinely different daily decisions, which compounded into a net worth of over $1.1 million by his late 40s. Identity researchers call this self-concept realignment, and it's one of the most powerful and hardest to fake psychological shifts a person can make because it changes behavior at the root instead of trying to override old habits with willpower alone. The failure mode here is obvious: talking about becoming a different person without ever actually doing the daily work to back it up. But the ones who genuinely make the internal shift almost always see the external results follow. Final summary: 10 types, 10 completely different psychological engines, and yet look closely and a pattern emerges underneath all of them. None of these people got rich through luck. None of them needed a genius IQ or a family inheritance. What they shared was a specific relationship with delayed gratification, self-image, or attention to detail that most people simply never develop. The gray man mastered invisibility, the obsessive hobbyist mastered intrinsic motivation, the pattern hunter mastered friction, the tortoise mastered patience, the quiet connector mastered trust, the anxious planner mastered preparation. The rule breaker mastered skepticism, the grinder mastered persistence. The calculated spender mastered intentionality, and the identity shifter mastered transformation itself. The wildest part? Most of these people never set out to become millionaires at all. Wealth was simply the byproduct of a mindset they built for entirely different reasons, and one day they looked up and it was just there. Call to action. So here's the real question: which of these 10 types are you? Maybe you recognized yourself instantly. Maybe you recognized your quiet uncle, your unassuming coworker, or that one friend who somehow always seems to have their life together without ever bragging about it. Drop a comment below and tell us which type you are, or which type someone in your life secretly is. We read every single one, and honestly, some of the best stories on this channel have come straight from the comment section. And if this video shifted even a little bit of how you think about wealth, hit subscribe, because we're breaking down the psychology of money, success, and human behavior every single week, and trust us, the next one might just change the way you see yourself. We'll see you in the next video.